I'm Kelly Kessner with this week's Investors Watchdog University. With me is Pat Huddleston, the founder of Investors Watchdog. And this week we're going to talk about why is investment fraud still a problem? Investment fraud has been around for hundreds of years, going all the way back to Ponzi's time and probably before that. We spoke a few weeks ago about Ponzi.
Right.
And the market goes up, the market goes down, we have different products being introduced, and yet we still have investment fraud. Pat, why is it still around? Why is it not going away and in fact getting worse?
Well, Kelly, the answer to that question may be the biggest benefit that people could get out of this video series, because the answer is not what you think it is. If I were to ask most of you out there why so many lose so much to investment fraud, most of you, based on my surveys, and I do these all over the country, would say gullibility, greed, or low intelligence are the primary culprits. And you're talking about the victims of these things, that they're gullible, they're greedy, they're not very smart. As it turns out, that's not the case. Those aren't the cause. The problem is our brain wiring. Psychologists and neuroscientists are discovering all the time that our brains are just pre-wired for certain functions that help us in some contexts, but actually hurt us in other contexts. And that's the case with the way our brains think about investments, just naturally.
I've actually read something about that. Doesn't the CIA train its analysts to basically analyze the cognitive biases or be aware of them so they can be more aware of problems that they encounter?
They do. They teach them, listen, unless you're able to assess your own thinking, unless you can think about how you think, you are bound to miss things. You're bound to see things that aren't there. You're bound to miss things, big things that are there. And so you can, if you want to Google CIA and cognitive biases, you'll be able to see those studies for yourself. I recommend it. Terrific reading. You need to know what's going on. There's some specific biases that I talk about in The Vigilant Investor that we'll just briefly cover today. First of all, the optimism bias. That is the bias that leads us to believe it must be gullibility or greed that's to blame for all these things. Why is that? Because none of us would describe ourselves that way, you see? And so the optimism bias makes us think that while disasters, including financial disaster, might happen to other people, it cannot happen to us. We think we're safe, but usually when I say that, pessimists think, well, I can stop listening now. I'm not an optimist. But this is a level of optimism that infects everybody. All of us are optimistic enough to go out of our doors every day. And so the optimism bias affects us all. And when we're meeting with a stockbroker, an investment advisor, it never occurs to us, because of this bias, that this person might cost us everything that we work for someday.
Are there other biases that may be specific to investment scams? I mean, this optimism bias sounds kind of innate and you're not even aware of it. Are there ones that you might be more aware of when dealing with investments?
Well, that's the sneaky thing about cognitive biases. They're all going on behind the curtain of your conscious thoughts. So you're not really aware of them unless you're coming to Investors Watchdog University and you're learning about them. There are others that we'll talk about, including one called the congruence bias that is very, very sneaky and actually jumps on you and affects you when you think you're out there doing your own investigation. The failure to identify the impact of these biases has really caused traditional due diligence methods to fail. You know, it's one of the reasons behind Bernie Madoff. It's one of the reasons behind all the Ponzi schemes you saw come to fore in 2008 to present time. And due diligence investigators need to start working those concepts into the way that they investigate. Usually the people who do due diligence investigations are very smart folks. They may have very impressive credentials, but they don't have fraud-specific experience. That means they may evaluate impressive, legitimate investments all day, every day. They may be able to talk to you about ratios and standard deviations and all that kind of thing. But they've never actually swum in an ocean of fraud, if you will. They don't know what a cleverly disguised fraud looks like. And so what we need to start insisting on is that our due diligence investigators have fraud-specific experience.
And Pat, I'm sure with your experience at the SEC and with everything you've done with Investors Watchdog, you're going to be able to help, and through your book and through Investors Watchblog, be able to educate people to be aware of some of these biases and then help recognize some of the frauds that are out there.
That's it, Kelly, exactly right. Just being able to know that these biases exist make you better. Reading stories of actual scams makes you even better. And so watching Investors Watchdog University, reading blogs, reading books will make you much better able to protect yourself and those who depend on you.
Well, we were just here to introduce you to some of these biases today, but we're going to go into them in greater depth in the future. For now, that's it for this week. Class dismissed.